Marcus Lemonis is the incredibly successful CEO of the nation's largest RV and outdoor retailer, Camping World. And he's host of his own TV show, The Prophet, which just entered its newest season. In his show, he goes around the country looking for struggling businesses that he can save with his cash and business savvy, and for a share of the ownership. Thanks for being with us.
Larry, thank you. It's a real honor.
We'll talk, my pleasure. We'll talk about that show. But first, why should running a business mean you'd be a successful president, since the presidency has nothing to do with profit and loss?
I don't know that it is. I've heard a lot in the last couple of weeks about how in order to be the president of the United States, you need to have run a business, and I'm not sure I buy off on it. I think understanding business and understanding how the people in the business work and how the profit and loss statement works is important. But this notion that you have to have run a business, I don't buy off on it. I don't.
So Donald Trump running solely on business experience is not a good reason?
You know what? I think that Donald Trump's done a nice job of having business be his backdrop, and I think for a lot of Americans, they see some credibility in business. But there are other issues, right? There's social welfare, there's foreign policy, there's just a lot of other things. I don't know that business necessarily is the only thing that matters.
Is the middle class disappearing in America?
I'm worried that it is. You know, I have 8,000 employees, and I go into businesses across the country, and you're seeing this evaporation of the middle class. And I think we've seen an increase in minimum wage that's tried to close that gap. But I'm afraid to tell you that I think it is.
Why is there such a gap that 1/10 of 1% of Americans own as much as 90% of the wealth? How did that happen?
Yeah, you know, I don't know how it happened, but I really feel, Larry, like it's a problem today. I think about the number of people today that own businesses and the number of people today that are unemployed, and the gap is just very wide. I don't know if consolidation was the kickoff of all of that. If you look over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of business consolidation. When the M&As started to really kick up and the public market started to kick up, small businesses don't exist like they used to. The failure rate's a lot greater, and big businesses are just a lot bigger. You're seeing, you know, deals that are $1 billion to buy a business that may be worth $500 million.
Are we overregulated?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we're overregulated. You know, I'm a big believer in sort of a free market economy, and when the government gets involved and starts regulating how we do business, it concerns me. I don't mind regulating food so that I'm safe, or drugs so that people don't get sick. But I think there's a very fine line, and I think sometimes we cross it. I do.
How did you come to this idea? Well, first, what's your stance on paid family leave?
You know, I have a very interesting stance on it. I think that the way I think about employees is very different than I think the government thinks about them. If you're going to run a good culture, you have to create an environment where people can have real life happen to them and not have a crisis. You think about retention in a business and how they're going to keep people at a company. Paid family leave, I think, is necessary. I don't know how you actually could tell somebody you're going to have a baby, you're going to have cancer, your wife's going to have cancer, your kid's going to get sick. Take some time off, but I'm not going to pay you. How many people live check to check? How are they going to pay their bills? It's going to be tough.
Does Bernie Sanders ring a lot of bells in you?
I think what Bernie Sanders does is he gets me to think about a lot of things. He says things that a lot of people aren't willing to say, and that's very different than Donald Trump saying things that a lot of people aren't willing to say. I think it's challenging people's intelligence and challenging their emotion without maybe crossing the slightly offensive line. But I do like him.
What about the TransPacific Partnership?
You know, you were talking about export-import, Larry? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
You know, I worry about it a lot. I'm a big importer of stuff from China for a lot of my businesses, but I'm also a big believer in manufacturing here. I think it's unrealistic for us to believe that every single thing can be manufactured in the United States. It's just not realistic. I think what will end up happening is the consumer will end up losing. And so we have to find this blend where the consumer can buy affordable products and American jobs can actually make product. But I don't think Americans can make everything today.
Marcus, are you endorsing anyone?
Not. You know, I think my role in society today is to really focus on small business. I've made it kind of my mission to do that. And I think anytime I let politics get in the middle of all of it, it creates confusion for my employees and my customers.
Define small business.
Well, Larry, I'm invested in over 100 small businesses. And to me, small business is really less than 50 employees and maybe less than $5 million of revenue. And I define small business differently than the SBA does. I think the SBA thinks about it being less than 20 million. For me, it's less than 5, where you can't generate enough revenue to have the sort of normal resources you need to run a real business, where one guy is kind of doing everything. And it's a challenge, and there's no support for those folks today. And I didn't hear anybody in any of the debates really focus on how we're going to solve the problem of small businesses that make up 90% of the people in this country work or own for a small business. When are we going to talk about it?
How did you get the idea of the profit?
I went through a really bad crisis in 2008 and 9 with my business during the downturn.
The RV business.
The RV business is like taking the housing market and the car business and mushing them together. And there were days where I really thought I was going to lose everything. And I remember laying off a lot of people and coming out of that recession thinking to myself that the country had really gotten into a really dark place. And I had suffered from a lot of problems as a child, whether it was eating disorders or being sexually abused, where I felt like I was always the underdog. And I don't know what happened, but I felt very blessed coming out of that downturn that I had to do something different. And so I met with CNBC and I talked to them about the fact that they were very strong on big business and very strong on telling people how bad the market was and Fortune 500 companies. And nobody was kind of fighting for this untold story. And I really felt like my big mouth and my checkbook can kind of solve some of those problems. I don't really feel like I'm going to be able to solve all of them, but you know, I've done 45 episodes and spent over $30 million of my own money trying to solve those problems. And I think for me, what's changed is that I'm meeting kids that are 7, 8, 9, 10 years old that are now telling me that they think it's cool to own a business, when kids before would tell you it's cool to be a professional football player.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Miami, and I watched.
Started.
Yeah, I watched Miami change. My family had a car dealership, Abraham Chevrolet.
Oh,
and Anthony Abraham is my grandfather.
You're kidding?
No.
I used to do commercials.
I know you did. I didn't want to tell anybody that before I came in here, but I've seen a lot of them. I remember having a conversation with my grandfather about his wealth, and most people don't know this about him, but he was a wonderful man, but he was a very confident man. And when I decided to run for office, I was 21 years old. I came back from college, and I decided to run for the state house in Florida at 21. And my family's big Republicans. And I registered as a Democrat, and the newspaper came out one morning. Miami Herald came out, and my mother called me, and she said, "We have a problem." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Your grandfather would like to see you at the office." Okay. I drove down there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and as you know, he worked every day. And he said, "I just want some good news for you. You're fired." And I said, "Wait a minute. This is where I work." He said, "Give me your demo keys. Here's your last paycheck. Good luck to you." And I said, "Well, why am I fired?" He said, "Number one, you're running as a Democrat, and you know that we're big Republicans. And number two, I told you that you need to clear stuff with me before you just go off doing your own thing." And it was one of those pivotal moments where I sat there and I said, "I love you very much. You brought me to this country. You've educated me. I'm grateful. But you can't tell me who I'm going to be." And I said, "You have a lot of money, but I promise you one day I'll have more." And we didn't talk for about 10 years. And he died when he was 103 years old. And I saw him about 4 months before he died. And he said to me, "You know what? I was harder on you than anybody else because I knew that I brought you to this country for a reason. And I knew that you were going to do great things."
Why did you choose the business you chose?
The RV business? You know, we grew up in the car business. I grew up in the car business with him. And the principles are somewhat the same. And my grandfather and Lee Iacocca were very good friends at the time. They dated the same woman. Not at the same time, but at one point in time. And Lee called me out to his house. He was on the board of a public company. And he said, "Son, I don't think you should be in the car business anymore. I think you have a lot of potential." He said, "I want you to take a look at the RV business. It's fragmented. Nobody's rolling it up. It's totally broken." And he said, "I'm willing to bet you that in 5 years you'll change the industry." I had dinner with him about 3 years ago, and I brought him a magazine where I attribute it to him, where I was named the person that changed the RV industry forever. and consolidated. I rolled up $3 billion worth of revenue by doing what I did in the car business.
How do you choose the business you'll invest in?
So I get 4,000 applications a year that want to be on the show. I take a lot of time. I actually go through them myself. And I end up picking the companies based on their story and their industry, but it's largely based on their character. And I don't mean their TV personality, their character, kind of what sort of problem I think they have and what they bring to the table. And we get crazy people.
But also it brings you a profit, doesn't it?
It brings me a profit. I've invested in 2.5 years, $30 million of my own money. I haven't seen a profit yet, but I'm not a seller. And so I see that these businesses have grown, whether it's an ice cream manufacturer that went from 2 to 20 million, or an auto dealer that went from 2 million to 100 million. I haven't sold any of them yet, but I'm not a seller. I just like to hold on to things. I do.
Does all of this affect your running of your own company?
It does. You know, I spend about 250 days a year working on these small businesses and shooting the show, and it definitely has had an impact. But I'd be remiss and I'd tell you that I think some people would argue that it's been positive because I'm not micromanaging every little thing in my own business. But it's had an effect more on my personal life, I think, than anything else. You know, I think what people don't realize is that when you own a business, the personal sacrifice that you have to make, you're not home as much, I don't have kids, I'm not married, you just don't have the time to do it all. And I know you can relate to it, that when you're doing your craft.
Oh, I lost a lot of marriages.
You lose marriages.
Because my work came first.
You lose friends. And I've had people say to me, I can't be in a relationship with you, you don't have your priorities right. And I said, I do have my priorities right. You just don't agree with them.
I never lost friends because I never owned a business. I always was a well-paid employee.
Yeah, it's a very different world. And it's a hard thing. And, you know, as I watch the debate, I cringe in some moments. I cringe kind of thinking about whether it's the Republican debate or the Democratic debate. It doesn't really matter to me. I cringe because I wonder what it's going to look like 10 years from now. And is it the same BS, and is it the same nonsense? And people have asked me if I would ever run for politics. My answer, again, I would say no, because I feel like I'm able to affect change doing what I'm doing now.
If Donald Trump is elected president, you know who the Democrats will nominate in 4 years?
Who's that?
George Clooney. It's a different world.
It is a different world. Great to meet you, sir.
Great meeting you.
Thank you.
The Prophet airs Tuesdays on CNBC at 10 o'clock Eastern.